Welcome back, everybody, to the School Leadership Show. This is Mike Dowdy, and with me, as always, is my relaxed co-host, Jenn David Lang. Because, Jenn, where does this podcast find you right now?
Oh, I've got a little time on the Jersey Shore with the fam, so I'm feeling relaxed. Working, but feeling relaxed.
I'm thinking that's a little bit better than where I am in Albany, New York, but it's okay.
Who's
Nonetheless,
comparing? No one's comparing.
no comparison. All right. So you want to tell folks what we're doing today? We got kind of it's a different episode, kind of a departure from our typical focus on a book and author. So
yeah, this is great. And maybe this will inspire listeners. So this came from a listener's request. He is going to be a leader in a new building. And so he said, Jenn, have you done a podcast on, tips and advice for leaders entering new buildings? And I thought, oh, why don't I interview Mike, hear a little bit about his experiences? And hopefully this will be relevant to everyone since it's August and many people are entering new buildings as leaders. So yeah, I thought we would just start with you. So Mike, you want to tell us a little bit about your leadership history and, what points you were a new leader in a building?
All right. So let's start at the very beginning, a very good place to start. So I started my career as a fifth grade teacher, and I taught fifth grade for a couple of years, best grade ever, I think, if you're teaching elementary school. And then from there, I taught high school math for a couple of years because I came out of college certified to do both things. Shout out to all my math friends out there. It's a very exclusive club. So
me too. I'm in that club. Woo.
That's right. What grades did you teach?
I was middle school. I loved the eighth graders, but that's another podcast. Go ahead.
It is. I avoided middle school as much as I possibly could because the high school I taught in was 10 through 12, and that was perfect. So, so I'm teaching high school math, and I think there's a whole nother podcast to talk about just generally a career trajectory and how you never know which relationships are going to lead to the next thing. So in college, I was a ski instructor, and the guy who ran the ski school at the mountain where I worked, his wife was a teacher in this small rural district in Western New York, upstate. So I know upstate for you, Jenn, is anything north of the Tappan Zee, probably north of Brooklyn. Anyway, so
the Bronx is upstate as far as I'm concerned.
I love it. This means nothing to anyone who doesn't live in New York. But anyway, so I was working at this ski school, and his wife worked at this school district, and he knew I wanted to become an administrator. I'd finished my coursework and was getting ready to do an internship. And he said, the building where my wife is a teacher, they have an opening for a principal. You should apply for it. And I thought, that is absolutely insane. I wasn't certified. I was coming out of the high school classroom. I mean, yeah, I taught elementary school, and I was 25 years old. All right. So I interview, I end up getting the job. The superintendent takes a chance on me. And I remember starting and going into my office, and at the time my father was a high school principal, so he was trying to give me advice and stuff, but he never really was an administrator in elementary. So get in there, and I walk in, and the guy who had been there before me was like 6'2", and I'm 5'6" on a good day. So I sit down in the chair behind the desk, and my feet legitimately don't touch the ground. So
it's a great image, Mike.
It's great. So I'm sitting there, and I'm kind of like, I'm not really sure what to do. So I go out and I talk to my administrative assistant. First time in my life I'd ever had somebody to work with like that. Her name is Lisa. And I'm like, Lisa, what am I supposed to do now? And she says, Jenn, no joke, because she was pretty new to the role too. So she says, well, I'm not sure, but I think if you take a clipboard and walk around, that's a good start. So I took a clipboard.
You didn't get a new chair first. Yeah.
And I start walking around. So yeah, so that was and I was the youngest staff member in the building. Ooh. And I was at elementary school, K-5, about 500 kids, and in a rural, like I said, it's a rural part of upstate New York. And it was wild. I learned so much. So I was there for a couple years, and then I went to a different school district, a more affluent school district in upstate New York, in the Rochester area, where I was an elementary principal, and I was there for about 10 years. So from there, I went to a BOCES, or for people outside of New York, an educational service agency. So I was there for about another 10 years, and as the deputy superintendent. And then I left there to go to a large inner ring suburban school district in upstate New York, where I was the deputy superintendent for a couple of years. And now I'm an assistant superintendent at another educational service agency in a different part of the state. So it's, I've gone school district to ESA, back to school district, back to ESA. So I've been probably 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 different places where I've been new and had to kind of start. And I think I learned a lot over that. I think each time I started something new, I kind of had a second to almost reinvent myself, because they were all in different organizations. So I could kind of look back on the things that I wish I had done differently in those other roles, and then make sure I didn't make those mistakes again, or focus in a different area than I might have before. And a lot of it is dependent on the context of where you're going, but I think there are some universal truths with starting any leadership role.
Yeah. And I think it's great. Some people, they're new in a role as a leader, and then they never have a chance to be new again and apply what they've learned. So since you have been new so many times, and you have thoughtfully condensed your learnings into 10 tips for leaders entering new school buildings or districts or other organizations, let's go over them and chat about them and see if we can save time and and mistakes.
So these are sort of in no particular order, but they kind of are. So my first one is to listen and learn. That, in those first, I think generally as a leader, you should go for the ratio of, you should listen 5 times as much as you talk. That's sort of how I try to approach it. But when you're new, especially if you didn't come up in that organization, you have a lot to learn. And there's people who've been there for a long time. And I know sometimes in education that's frustrating, because there's a lot of inertia and resistance to change. But at the same time, you can't work on the system unless you really understand the system. And part of understanding the system is learning the history, learning the, who has the power, who doesn't, who can help, who, I found in, New York's a heavily unionized state. And I found where I had the most success was with developing really positive relationships with the union leadership in the building and in the district. And anytime I would, think about, starting something different or going in another direction, I would always have conversations with the teacher leadership that way, to just because I was new to it, and just to make sure that I wasn't going down a track that was going to get me fired or, lose my certification or something like that. And there were a couple of times where I remember this one building rep in that first school where I remember saying to her, and she had children older than I was at the time. So I was like, just tell me. I told her, and I gave her permission. I said, listen, if you see me doing something that you think is crazy or that's going to get us or me in trouble, tell me so I don't do it. Or, and even trying to, to listen to that feedback and invite that feedback from other people, and to just be vulnerable up front and say, listen, I'm coming in here. Y'all have your ways of doing things. And that's great, because for the most part, you can say that unless you're going into a building that is in receivership or something. You can, lots of good things going on here already. I don't want to mess that up. I want to make sure I learn what's happening, and just don't talk, just listen.
And that's hard to do. Yeah, I'm so glad you started there, Mike, because I do think of all the interpersonal skills that a leader has, listening is up there. And I would add to what you're saying that it's not just for while you're new, but to keep that listening up. for several reasons. One, sometimes you can even resolve a problem simply by listening. Often people just want to be heard. And so you can help lower the temperature as problems and issues come up just by listening, being a supportive listener. There is a great quote from Maya Angelou that I always think about when I think about the power of when you listen. And that is, I've learned that people will forget what you said, they'll forget what you did, but people will never forget how you made them feel. And if you can make people feel listened to, you're already 5 steps ahead of the game.
Huge.
And then, yeah, the second thing is, right, so how do you do that, right? It's not like you just come in and say, hey, I'm here to listen. So, one structure that's really helpful is to have a whole bunch of one-on-one meetings with teachers, leaders. You may just have 2 questions, the same questions that you ask everyone. You can, think about what's most important. What should I know? What's the best thing about working here? What's one thing you would change if you could change one thing? Just ask 1 or 2 questions, the same questions. And if you set up a structure for one-on-one meetings with staff and then continue those, that will be a powerful structure to put in place for your first year and perhaps. Yeah.
So glad you brought that up, because in every place I've gone, that's one thing that I've always done, is just put out the invitation, say, anybody who wants to come meet with me one-on-one, if you want to meet with me in a small group, whatever, happy to meet with you. And the other thing that does too, and I would suggest this because I haven't always done this, take notes and even like about the person. Not yes, you care what they say, but it's also a good way to get to know people. Asking them questions, appropriately, not invasively, but about their family and like what they do in their spare time, and things like that. Like getting to know people that way, huge. And not everybody's gonna take you up on coming to talk to you, and that's okay too. I think it's just by offering it, it sends a very, very clear message. And the one caveat I would throw in that is that there is a tendency, and I've fallen into this trap as a new leader, where you believe wholeheartedly the last thing you heard.
Yeah. That's a
right?
whole other topic.
It's a whole other topic, but it's true. Because sometimes you got to be careful, because the people who line up first to come talk to you are the ones with axes to grind sometimes. So you got to be really careful and just take it all in before you start making decisions based on what you hear.
And that's why I might depart from you here, Mike, and that, rather than inviting whoever wants to, is to really set up one-on-ones with everyone. And if people don't want to share personally, you'll get that. They can be short meetings, but we don't want to just listen to the squeaky wheels.
True
we want
story.
to listen. But let's go. So what's your second tip?
My second one is analogous to the first one. It's about effective communication. So beyond listening, I think it's really important that you're very deliberate with all of your communication. So emails, because everything that comes from you is a reflection of you. And I've seen principals where they've sent things out, and maybe a school-wide letter or something, and then it comes back anonymously with red marks on where you had typos. And you don't want, that's not the version of you want out there. So I would say just to be very deliberate about communication, communicate as little as possible, but as much as necessary. And I think particularly for big, high stakes types of communication, like if you have a presentation that you're giving to all the parents or to the PTA or something like that, practice the presentation ahead of time so you know exactly what you're going to do, how the transitions work, all that stuff. If you're sending out something in writing or in print that's going to a lot of people, have a half a dozen people proofread it before you send it out so that you are reflecting your best self out there. That's kind of,
and I think I would add that sometimes we think we're being clear, like, oh, I emailed the staff about that, but people need to hear things in different ways, the same way, students learn in different ways. So if you have an important initiative or announcement, so sure, email it, but then also put it on the website, then also remind people, over communicate in different ways. I'm not saying bombard people with 20 emails a day, don't. And certainly another thing to put under communication is I would put an end time. past a certain time that nobody wants a leader who's going to email them at 10 p.m., 2 p.m. in the morning. You can use schedule send for that, but try to communicate in different ways and figure out, maybe in this community, everybody's on Facebook, right? Maybe
Right.
everybody, maybe it's old school and it's newsletters in the kids' backpacks, or, who knows? But also, just because you said something once doesn't mean that everybody is clear on it. So better to over communicate your values and your most important initiatives and ideas.
Absolutely. My next one is around this one, lead by example. I think this is an important one. If you want people to focus on instruction, then you need to talk about instruction, and you need to make that a priority in all of your conversations and not get tied. It's very easy to get all gnarled up in the day-to-day operations and the mechanical things of running a building, and to keep yourself away from that is huge. That's sort of like the big sort of ethereal piece of it. But then there's the concrete stuff. You shouldn't look like a slob when you show up for work. You shouldn't be, sprinting to your car to get to your, golf game or whatever before the school day is over. Everything, like, you are on stage, you are out there, everybody is paying attention all the time to what you're doing as the leader. And even if you think something is fine and you would be happy to let someone else do it, well, if you do it, taking off early, getting in late, I mean, things like that, even being loose with your language and your speech, it's you got to be careful. And I think that's something that we don't often talk about. And I think a lot of it's cultural. Talk to the other leaders in your organization and ask, how do we do things around here? If I have to go to a board meeting, do I need to be in my full school administrator costume, or are we casual here? Like, what's the culture piece around that? And I think, ask the questions for sure. My next, good.
Oh, but about the leading by example, I think absolutely, and dotting your I's and crossing your T's. But I think the areas where leading by example are most important is in teaching, learning, and love of students. So, so like Mike said, so you're saying that there shouldn't be so much teacher talk, right? Or you're saying that your teachers should lead student-centered classrooms. Then when you lead PD, you should be leading PD like
Exactly.
that. Right?
Yeah.
You're the lead learner and the lead teacher. So the way you run meetings, right? If it's you talking at people for 3/4 of the time, that's not leading by example. So think about your meetings and your PD sessions, and then your own learning. Right? We're saying that students should be learning, teachers should be learning. What about us as leaders, right? Oh, I just read this article and I thought you, Mike, chair of the math department, might like it, right? I read this book summary from the main idea, or, what are you doing to keep up your own learning and love of learning? And then finally, love of students. I think as a new leader, the best thing you can do is model being in there with the kids, whatever it is you like to do, right? Did you love, recess? Then, go in and join for a few minutes in recess. I know one principal who just absolutely loves middle school fiction, and he had a book club with students and he ran that. So that just shows you're not so far removed in the paperwork, but you're modeling what you want teachers to do. Sorry, go ahead, Mike. Number
Great.
4.
Getting in there and teaching, teaching a lesson every once in a while. The other thing too that I think is really important, and you kind of touched on it, is modeling how you want people to interact with students. So every time I was talking with a student, I was thinking about, is this how I would want the teachers in my school talking to a student? And almost taking it to the next level of, if this student goes home and repeats this conversation to his parents, am I going to be comfortable having a conversation with the parents about the conversation I had with the kid, if that makes sense?
No, great point.
So, all right. So next one, stay visible.
Number 5.
1, 2, 3. This is 4. We're on 4.
Okay. Sorry, I didn't hear it. Say it again.
Stay visible. Be visible. So, you shouldn't be in your office. In fact, I had a superintendent one time who called my desk phone, and I happen to be in there, and I answer the phone, and she goes, "What are you doing?" I'm like, I just in my office. Like, she goes, "Get out of your office." So, which is pretty funny. But, get out. The whole point is to be where the work is happening, and the work is happening in classrooms. So, you can learn a lot by walking around. We've had conversations about supervision related to, shorter visits into classrooms and everything that goes along with that. It's for a different podcast, but, getting out there, that's the best way to get to know students and faculty and staff, and also to make sure the building is, that things are the way they need to be. It is everything clean? Are things accessible? Are, things like that are kind of the minutia, but make a difference. If the building's dirty, that's a problem. Let's
And one
see. Yeah.
example, he used to be around the building all the time, and I was walking down the hallway with him, and he picked up a piece of garbage, and I just
Always.
thought, talk about modeling, Mike, right? From the top, this school is important to me. I'm going to pick up a piece of garbage. I'm not going to call, head of maintenance, right?
Yep.
But about being visible, I think it's a big part of the culture, which is obviously such a huge part of what you're doing. You're setting the tone for the culture. So rather than assigning, teachers to be in the hallways for passing times, if you're in a middle or high school, or it's just assigning teachers for the lunchroom, these are places you should be, to model, like Mike said, what is your behavior like with students, with other teachers, to have your fingers on the pulse of what's going on. You should be regularly not just observing teaching, but everything in your school building. Do regular culture walkthroughs. What is the feeling like, in the staff room? Is it gossipy? Is it friendly? Is it inclusive? What does it feel like, so that you can make some changes? And the thing is, you'll see how proactive you can be, right? You're walking around, and just before a fight starts, someone pulls you in, hey, I need some help here, right? Or before some gossip between teachers is spread, or between, I think it's very proactive to walk the buildings and be visible, like Mike said.
And it will allow you to take care of a lot of things that otherwise might generate email or meetings that you can just knock out while you're walking around. People catch you with a quick question, you can answer it, no email. So the one that goes along with that is time management, because you can't be out and around if you can't manage your time. So there's this, you got to balance the administrative tasks with the instructional leadership. And this is where I would say you should be meeting with if you're lucky enough to have an administrative assistant or the main office secretary or whoever it is that's supporting you, you should be meeting with that person every single day. And that person should be managing your calendar and helping you allocate your time. In all of the settings where I've been responsible for student programs, I've arranged my calendar so that I have the equivalent of 3 days where I was not in the office, which meant that there were 2 days. So it might be half day here, half day there, half day, that I would be in the office. And that's when meetings would get scheduled. That's when I would return phone calls. That's when all that stuff, or see kids, that's, for discipline or whatever, that's when that would happen. Now, of course, there'd be times where, Mr. Dowdy, come to the office, we need, whatever. But, for the most part, if you can build that in and work with your administrative assistant, huge. That's probably one of the most important partnerships that you have as a school leader, is with your administrative assistant. We should do an entire podcast on just that.
Yeah, no, I'm so glad that you brought that up, because some people don't think to bring that up. 2 things. One, with the office assistant, it would be very helpful to train the office assistant on what are the tasks that person can do instead of you, and other people can do instead of you, right? So the angry parent comes into the office and is upset that her child's bus stop got moved. I want to speak to the principal. The office assistant should be trained to, oh, this is the person in charge of that, right? A kid comes in needing a Band-Aid. Oh, nurse. Because you should see the office assistant as someone who is sort of a buffer to allow you as the leader to focus on teaching and learning. Otherwise,
and an extension of you, and that, and you have to respect that person. So, for example, my assistant that I work with now, if I'm in a meeting and that meeting's running late and she knocks on the door and pokes her head in and says, you need to go to your next meeting, I jump up and go. I do exactly what she says. That way people know that if anything comes from her, it's basically coming from me. And
Yeah,
that's a big, big deal.
it
Um,
is. And
I had
just to
one
add
more.
one more
Yeah.
thing about the time management piece, that before you step in a building, to set up some type of a system. Mike and I are big on time management. If you want to read a summary of David Allen's Getting Things Done, a million things are going to be flying at you. And if you start dropping the ball, you're going to lose credibility. So you're walking down the hallway and a teacher says, hey, Mike, can you send that article that you were talking about? And then you're walking down another hall and a student says, oh, Mr. Dowdy, I need to meet with you. And then you get 3 emails requesting something and a phone call and a district, message. You have all this in where are you going to put all of your tasks, because you'll start to drop them. So you need a system. It's the busiest, most multi-layered job in the universe. So you need a system before you step in the door.
And it doesn't, and this is important. It doesn't matter what the system is. You just need a trusted system, because what works for Jen might not work for me, might not work for you. So yes, huge. All right, next one. This kind of goes along with that, with empowering your team. So, it's going to depend on the kind of building you're in and the structure. I was in elementary school. So for me, the most important, like really important team members for me, obviously secretary, nurse, custodian, counselor, psychologist, social worker, those people in the building who have like the one person roles, that's what I viewed as my team. Like those were the people who could really help me get things done, who would know the cook manager in the cafeteria, huge. Like they often would know if stuff was bubbling and could tell you, and then you empower them to get things done. And you had mentioned it before, like there are things that are other people's jobs. Like it's not your job as a principal to provide counseling to kids. That's someone else's job. So I think empowering people to do their jobs is huge, and then supporting them as they do them. And I think that kind of goes along with, I think the empowerment piece is also about the support, because if you are perceived as not supportive of your teachers, you're done. You might as well polish up the resume and head somewhere else. So walking that fine line of doing what's best for kids, but also supporting staff as much as you can sometimes be challenging, but it's a big piece of, why people are successful or not.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought up, teams. Managing teams is one of your most important jobs as a school leader. And I think certainly having an administrative team, and I would also encourage you to have an ILT or or cabinet, yep, or some type of instructional leadership team, people who are focusing on teaching and learning, whether that's all your department chairs if you're at a high school and your assistant principals, or maybe it's the head of the 7th grade team, 8th grade, 9th grade team, 4th grade. And for both the administrative and the instructional leadership team, structure meetings that should be in their calendar meetings. It should be in everyone's calendar, not meeting ad hoc as needed. It's another way to be proactive about what you want to do. And, just be really clear about roles. What are people's roles? What's the purpose of the meeting? And use that first month to identify people's strengths. Oh, this person is really organized. Oh, this person has read every single article about literacy. Oh, find out what people's strengths are and build from those strengths. The multiplier effect, build on other people's strengths, as Mike says, empower them.
So, and I think kind of in that same vein, my next one, my number 7, would be build relationships. So, if you're doing all the things that we talked about before, that's going to help you build relationships. But it's also something that I feel like you have to be deliberate about. And relationships take work, they take time, they can be rocky, but it's important that, people not only perceive you as wanting to build relationships, but that you legitimately do. So connecting with staff, teachers, students, parents, the community, any way you can to build trust and collaboration is going to pay dividends like crazy.
Yeah, I think that it's one way of thinking about building trust is building relationships. And basically, when you build relationships, you sort of put money in the trust bank so that when, not if, when you make a mistake or mistakes, there will be trust already built up, and people will give you more latitude than if you hadn't. And so, Mike uses the word deliberate because it's very easy to walk down the hallway and smile, but that's in reaction to. So how can you plan to be deliberate? So maybe if you're having all these one-on-one meetings with staff, you ask something personal, not invasive, but personal. What do you like to do when you're not working in schools? Very open-ended. And then a test for yourself a month into the job, list all of your staff members, and can you name one non-work related thing about each of them? This person, likes to play tennis, or this person listens to, a million podcasts or whatever it is. And if you can't, then go out and specifically for those staff members you can't answer that question about, go specifically find some time with them and learn about them, and then refer to those things. That goes so far. If on Monday, oh, how was your son's birthday party, right? Oh, how'd you do in that half marathon over the weekend? Just little comments like that go a really long way.
And I'll tell you that's not something that comes naturally to everyone. In fact, it was not something that came naturally to me at first, and I had to work on it. And I got some feedback about that, that certain people felt like I wasn't connecting with them or whatever. And it takes work, and there are times where, and once you get into this, you'll have this feeling, and you'll get it, that like you'd be walking, there's places that you naturally gravitate toward. I would spend a lot of time in the cafeteria, and I don't know why. And then there were certain teachers that you just liked being in their classroom, so you would kind of gravitate there. And then you step back and realize, oh my God, I never go into this other teacher's classroom, and that's a problem. Like that happened to me when I was working at the BOCES, and part of my responsibilities were career and technical education. Well, I love to cook, so I would go to the culinary classrooms all the time, and then not sort of at the expense of the other programs. So I had to legitimately force myself to go other places, which when you get there, it's great because there's great stuff going on everywhere. But I think unless you push yourself to go where you're less comfortable, you won't do it.
And one simple way to do that, if you have 30, 40 teachers, you could put their names on popsicle sticks and put them in one jar, all filled on Monday morning, and have an empty jar, and, pull out 2 or 3 of those sticks to, go chat with those 3 staff members in the staff room, hallways, wherever it is, and then put them in that jar. And then you pull from the filled jar on the second day, on Tuesday. And it's a way to sort of make it more equitable, not just, we gravitate towards certain teachers or certain areas of the building, like Mike said.
I love that. The popsicle sticks, that's a fabulous idea. All right, next one, to set clear goals. Okay. And I think this, many levels of this. I mean, certainly goals for yourself in terms of an entry plan and getting to know people and that whole thing, but also goals for the building, around instruction and, continuous improvement and things like that. Your own personal goals, yeah, those are your personal goals, you work on those. But when it comes to goals for the building, this is a really, really important time to engage stakeholders so that people know, like the ILT, or instructional leadership team that you mentioned, in most of the places where I was a principal, that structure existed. So that was the group that worked on the school improvement plan and worked on the goals and things like that. So I think that's really, I think it's a big one. And, some people say, well, they have to be SMART goals. Well, sometimes. I'm not always a huge fan of SMART goals, but I think any kind of framework that you have that you stick to, I think is going to be better than the one you don't. But at the same time, I think the best goals and the best results come when everybody's involved in the creation of the goals and deciding how they're measured and things like that.
Interesting that you said that, because I run mastermind groups, and this week the topic is, how do you set your priorities for the year? And then how do you translate a priority into a few goals, and goals into tasks for September, October, and November? And so, well, a couple of things. First of all, one, it's a fine balance when you're new, right? And Mike talked about listening. So, it's probably not the best to immediately come out with a whole bunch of goals on your own. But like Mike said, this is going to involve a lot of listening and collaborating so that it's not you coming in like a steamroller when you don't really know the school yet. And then the second thing is that, unless priorities and goals are operationalized, then, people sort of see them as useless. Like, oh, yeah, we're going to set teacher goals, in September. And then I know, no one's going to mention them till June. So I think there's a lot, and we could do a whole podcast about this. Like I said, I did a whole mastermind session on very simple, just, very few priorities or goals. 1, 2, and really build in concrete tasks and places when you're going to check in. And it doesn't have to be something crazy like a SMART goal. It can just be, let's say one of your goals is to improve attendance because attendance has been low. That, we're going to check in on this every other week with one of my leadership teams, and we're going to set a goal to improve our achievement. These are the tasks we're going to do over the next month. And then these are our check-in points.
I love it. My next one, my number 9, is to embrace conflict. So when you are the leader, a lot of times what gets to you is conflict, whether it's between students, between teachers and students, teachers and parents, you name it, teachers and teachers, conflict is coming and you can't avoid it, and you can't be conflict averse. You have to be right in there. And as leaders, we get paid to have difficult conversations. That's our job. And it's one of those things. It's like giving presentations. You can't be bad at it. I'm sorry. You can't say, well, I'm not good at doing this. Nope, not a choice. So just like you have to be good at public speaking and giving presentations, you need to be good at embracing and managing conflict. And that means having difficult conversations, saying things to adults that you never thought you would ever have to say to another adult, but you do. And I think there's tons of resources out there. We did that one presentation a while ago on difficult conversations, and you've done multiple books related to that topic. You want to talk about that?
Yeah, it's funny. Before the pandemic, I think it was like over 4 years ago, Mike and I did a workshop on difficult conversations, and we both still do variations of that. But yeah, I mean, in one book that I read, one principal estimated that you will spend 30 to 40% of your time either preventing or addressing conflict. So that's a lot of time when you think about it, right? About a third of your time. So obviously, Mike is not saying he expects a new leader in a new building to be excellent at this to start, but I think that word embrace it, meaning it's part of the job. And if done well, in the workshop we did, the goal is to take conflict, which is really a message, right? When there's conflict, there's a message that something needs to be worked on. And the goal is to move toward dialogue and to turn it into a productive dialogue. And so as a leader, there are a lot of skills we could do another podcast about that, but it's really listening to people, having a pause, and don't just react when somebody blows up in your face or gets upset. You may need to continue the conversation another time. And then really developing some skills in understanding the other person's point of view, understanding what might be underneath the purported conflict, because even if the conflict is about something about, the classroom that you assign a teacher to, it's usually about something larger, like respect or purposes that are not the same, your purpose and the other person. So really understanding what might be at the heart of the conflict, and then really trying to find a purpose that you and the other person, the teacher, the parent, the staff member, have in common, and brainstorm some solutions. But it is a part of the job. Don't think, oh, it's because you're doing something wrong. So expect it and embrace it. And with time and reading a few books, we based a lot of the workshop on Crucial Conversations. There's also another book, Difficult Conversations, by Doug Stone and Sheila Heen. And there are a lot of resources. This one will really take a lot of time.
And it's so important. You like you said, you can't avoid it, and you have to be good at it. And it is a skill that you can improve. So even if you are conflict averse, which I feel like I am, you can still learn skills that help you embrace it. I keep saying embrace because I don't want it to be about managing. Like you really have to own it and love it in a lot of ways because it's a huge part of your job. All right. And my last one is self-care. So in my first principal gig, I basically, I was married, but we didn't have any children yet. And I pretty much worked nonstop for the first, I don't know, 4 or 5 weeks that I was the principal, to the point like late nights, early mornings, burning the candle at both ends, to the point I ended up getting pneumonia. I let myself get so run down because I felt like I just needed to do everything all at once. And you can't. Like, I think that's part of this. Part of self-care is owning the fact that you're not going to change everything all at once. And we've talked about this in other podcasts. If everything's a priority, nothing is. So figuring out what your priorities are and making sure that you're giving time for yourself to do the things that recharge you. And whatever that is, if it's spending time with family, if it's, hiking or exercising, who cares? Whatever it is, you have to have something outside of work that's going to ground you and center you and keep you healthy. Because at the end of the day, it is a job, and it's what you do for money so that you can live, right? We don't live to work, we work to live. And I watch people just burn themselves out because they think they have to do everything all at once. It's a process, it's a journey. It sounds trite, but it's true. You really you will make yourself sick if you don't prioritize your own self-care. Full stop.
Yeah, as you did, Mike, with the pneumonia. And, if you really are all in it for the kids, the families, the teachers, the worst thing for a school is having a leader come and leave too soon.
Exactly.
The best thing for a school is stability. So if you really care about the school, if you can't put yourself first, because I know a lot of people can't, then put the school first by understanding the way you do that is by staying as a leader. I don't know what the most recent statistics on how long new leaders stay for, but do you know,
I know
Mike?
for superintendents, it's just over 3 years.
Yeah.
Which is scary.
Right. So if you can stay on the job in the same school for 5, 7, 10 years, that's going to be the most helpful. And it's going to take a while to figure out what that is. But I think some of it is organization, that if you know your priorities, that these are the only 2 things I have to get done today, and everything else, I have it recorded somewhere. I'm not losing it. I'm going to do it tomorrow, not today, or I'm going to do it later. Some of it is just actual organizational skills and not feeling like you've got to-dos on Post-it notes everywhere and you're overwhelmed. And then some of it is, yes, having some other things, like Mike said, whether it's a running buddy on Saturday mornings or whether it's family dinner that you need to get home for, whatever it is, a phone call with a friend that's not school and that's not work.
And I think also with the self-care, I mean, beyond it being about yourself and your ability to go to work and do the job, there's also an opportunity when you prioritize your own self-care to lead by example, because we know that teachers burn out at a crazy rate. And if you can lead by example with your own self-care, you're giving staff permission to do the same. And they're people first and teachers second.
Yeah. I know a lot of leaders who think, oh, I have to be the first to get in and the last to get out. No, what if you have, your daughter's hockey game to get to, right? Then don't be the last one to leave. Model that. And
I would always, I always felt like it was my job to extend to staff members the same grace that I would want extended to me by my supervisor. So teacher says, hey, I gotta duck out a couple minutes early to get my daughter to hockey practice. Great, fine. If you can find somebody to cover, great. If not, let me know, I'll do it. Right. So I think that goes a long way. I mean, obviously there's going to be people who try to take advantage of it, but I would argue those are few and far between. I think generally people want to do a good job and they're going to act in that way. So yeah, that was my top 10.
Great. Good. Anything last to add? These are great. I like these. I might type them up or ask you to
I
send
got,
me.
you know what I'm going to do? I think I'm going to put the list of them in the show notes.
Oh, that would be great. That
So
would
I'll
be
list them out in the right order because I kept track as we were going. And then that way people can see them. And then I don't know, maybe, who knows, maybe if we get some feedback from people and they want us to go deeper on some of these topics, you know, we could dedicate whole episodes with resources to any of these individual ones.
Yeah, absolutely. Put reviews or comments, and we can go deeper on any of these, because they all could be their own podcast by themselves. But just be sure, be you, and enjoy. If you don't enjoy it, you won't stay.
Jen, I'm here to tell you,
Yeah.
and anybody who's listening, that elementary school principal is the best job in the world, bar none. It is the closest you get to being a rock star. Everybody loves you. I mean, provided you're doing a good job, and you can have so much impact as a principal at any level, but as a building level administrator, don't underestimate the impact you have, not only on individual students and staff, but on the system as a whole. And that's a big deal.
It's a beautiful sentiment. We should end right there.
Sounds good. Thanks for listening to this episode of the School Leadership Show, a podcast for aspiring and practicing school leaders. Send your comments, questions, and show ideas to me, Mike, at schoolleadershipshow.com. And please consider rating the podcast in iTunes and leaving a comment. And definitely pass the show along to your colleagues.